Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're diving into a deeply relatable, honestly pretty challenging story about holding on to the completely wrong part of a legacy. We're going to take a profound look into the historical text of 1 Samuel chapter 4. And as we do, we'll be tackling a question that really hits right at the core of human nature. What actually happens when people lose the true weight of glory in their lives?
To kick things off, picture this. Imagine a grandfather passing down a battered, incredibly old military canteen to his grandson. Every single time he shows it to the boy, he tells him the exact same story. I survived thanks to this canteen. When I was crossing the desert, when I totally collapsed from my wounds, a single sip of water from this canteen saved me. He's constantly, emphatically reminding his grandson that the life-saving water inside was what actually brought him home.
Well, fast forward a few years, the grandson grows up, and one day he's proudly displaying this canteen to his friends. They ask him what's inside, and he suddenly realizes he has literally never opened it. To the grandfather, this was a vital vessel holding life, but to the grandson, it had become just an empty heirloom to brag about. He completely missed the point and forgot about the water. And our source text uses this exact dynamic to perfectly mirror how people so often treat religion. We end up instrumentalizing our faith to serve our own human desires, desperately clutching a sacred object while completely forgetting the God inside it.
So to really understand how we make this exact same mistake today, we're going to map out our historical deep dive into 1 Samuel chapter 4 by covering 1. Battles without asking. 2. The religious remedy. 3. Exploiting the divine. 4. Ichabod, the departed glory. And finally, 5. Enthroning the daily king.
All right, let's jump right into part 1, battles without asking.
Setting up the battlefield here, the historical text tells us that Israel marches out to fight the Philistines. Now, context is key. The Philistines were highly advanced technologically for their time. They had iron weapons and a complex urban civilization. So purely from a human perspective, it completely made sense for the Israelites to be terrified. But their tragic mistake here isn't a military one. Their fatal error is that they totally failed to ask God or even the prophet Samuel before heading into battle.
The real tragedy is in the sequence of events. Just one chapter prior, Samuel is officially established as a prophet. The word of God is back in the picture. Yet the community just marches off to war based on their own hasty calculations. The result? 4,000 men are killed in the very first battle. The crucial takeaway is that their defeat wasn't because they lacked soldiers. They lost because the basic order of enthroning God as their actual king had already collapsed before a single sword was swung. They were just making decisions however they saw fit.
Which brings us to our next major problem in part 2, the religious remedy.
After losing 4,000 men, the elders actually ask a pretty great question. Why did the Lord bring defeat on us today? But instead of repenting or examining their own hearts, they immediately seek a quick religious remedy by bringing the Ark of the Covenant directly to the battlefield. Let's look at the Hebrew here because it's fascinating. Covenant, or berit, signifies a holy relationship where God is king. The Ark, or Aaron, is simply the box that serves as evidence of his presence. By bringing the Ark to the front lines, they were attempting to drag God's physical object into their mess rather than returning to God himself. They wanted a magical quick-fix remedy with absolutely none of the relationship.
To put this in perspective, let's look at what was actually inside this box, based on Hebrews 9. There was a gold jar of manna, which was meant to remind them to live daily by grace. There was Aaron's staff, providing evidence of God's sovereignty and order. And of course, the stone tablets, proving God's rule by his word. The point is, this ark was never meant to be a magic victory box or some kind of wartime amulet. It was meant to remind them to live under God's grace and holy order. They possessed the physical evidence of the word, but had absolutely zero obedience to it.
And that leads to a really shocking turning point in part 3, exploiting the divine.
When the ark finally arrives at the camp, it is accompanied by the corrupt priests Hophni and Phinehas, two men who the text tells us explicitly despised God's holy order. Yet despite this massive glaring issue, the Israelite army lets out a massive ground-shaking shout of joy. They are mistakenly treating the King of Heaven, who the text notes is enthroned between the cherubim, as a manipulatable tool to secure their own victory. They have no desire to submit to his rule. They literally just want to exploit his power to win their war.
As we trace this timeline, we hit a devastating climax. Ironically, the Philistines actually fear the majesty of Israel's God more than Israel does. But despite Israel's elaborate religious theater and all their shouting, God utterly refuses to reinforce their false faith. He will not be used as a prop.
The result is a disastrous slaughter. 30,000 men die. The corrupt priests are killed, and the unthinkable happens. The ark itself is captured. God chose a devastating judgment where his people were broken down rather than a victory where his holy name was exploited.
The aftermath of this staggering defeat brings us to Part 4, Ichabod, the departed glory.
To really grasp the gravity of this aftermath, we have to understand the word glory. In Hebrew, the word is kabod. At its very root, it means weight. It refers to something profoundly honorable, majestic, and something that should never, ever be treated lightly. Israel completely lost the weight of God's glory because they valued their own military victory, their own ambitions, and their own methods far more heavily than they valued God himself.
The news of the battle reaches Eli, the high priest, who tragically falls over and dies upon hearing the ark is captured. At that exact same time, his daughter-in-law, Phinehas's dying wife, goes into premature labor. As she is dying, she names her newborn child Ichabod. It literally translates to, "The glory has departed." She permanently branded this era as a time where the physical sanctuary and all the right religious language remained, but the actual weight, presence, and glory of God had completely vanished.
So how do we make sure we don't repeat this tragedy? Let's look at Part 5, Enthroning the Daily King.
The source material gives us some very concrete daily methods to ensure God is actually treated as king in our everyday lives, and not just treated as a break glass in case of emergency backup plan. First, we have to deliberately slow down the speed of our personal desires before we start blindly calculating things like job salaries or school prestige. Second, we have to actually ask God before the crisis hits. And third, we need to use prayer as a way to bow to his will, rather than just endlessly trying to persuade him to bless a path we stubbornly chose ourselves.
Now, in the midst of the absolute despair of Ichabod, the biblical text actually points us to an incredible ultimate hope. Human religion completely collapsed because humans couldn't just pull God down to their level to serve them. So the text notes, God came down himself. Jesus is presented here as the true temple, the true living presence of God. As the Gospel of John says, the Word became flesh, bringing the ultimate glory to restore a deeply broken covenant. As we wrap up this explainer, the analysis of 1 Samuel leaves us with one deeply critical question to ponder. What is the Ark of the Covenant that you are holding on to right now? Are you pursuing a true, submitted relationship with the king? Or are you just desperately clutching that old military canteen to show off to others, completely forgetting the life-saving water inside? Take some time to think about that, and really consider the true weight of glory in your own life.